fine. Okay, so what we're going to start off with is just kind of a little view of what the program's capable of doing and what a webinar is like. So let me go ahead and get rid of some of these little annotations. I don't know, I have that little green spot still, but okay. So this program behaves a little different than the other programs that you have, but that allows it to do other things such as connect to like a silhouette or a zing cutter or any cutter that has the capability of connecting to your computer. So one of the neat things about this program is that you can use this to create applique and have your cutter cut it. You can create scrapbook designs in this program. You can create sequence templates to put like rhinestones in, or I shouldn't say sequence, rhinestone templates. And you can really use this as a digitizing program and as a scrapbooking program. So it really does double duty. And the difference in this program is that instead of creating an outline specifically for embroidery like we do in Digitizer, you can use this program to draw. And even if you're tracing over an image, it's still a drawing process. If you know someone who creates CorelDRAW or Illustrator vector images, then you can use the automatic portion. What I'm going to show you here is we're going to use a bitmap first, because that's generally what most of us have access to very easily, is a bitmap image. So if I say, okay, I'm going to use this little, image that I used in the previous one, and create a new file, I get to select some things first. Like I get to tell the program what fabric I'm going to use. And I'm going to stay with cotton, but I do want to show you, what options I have here. Like if I have denim for, I can say, okay, it's got a kind of a black base and a blue over top, or, maybe it's got a pink over top, or, there's different fabric things here. There's a flannel, there's a lightweight vinyl satin, and you can see there's, quite a few settings here, like, on bridal tall. These settings aren't for a background image. These settings control how, your density, your automatic density and your automatic underlay, and, things like that in the design as well. So this is built into the wizard. As you go through, you're going to pick a fabric. You can always come in inches, but I'm going to stick with cotton for our, little webinar here. And I can color one as well, so I'm going to just white too and say next. And this little wizard guides me through this process to bring an image into the program. If, I want to use a specific image, I click on little ... button, and I can go into my folders wherever I store these images. And Windows 8 is always a little bit different on getting to some of your files. It's taken me a little bit of time to get used to the file setup. But let me go over to these images, and unlike Digitize, it just goes to the default bitmap. This kind of goes to an all supported formats, and I can open quite a few different formats. Here's a bitmap. There's a WMF file. Sometimes I get a preview, and if I don't get a preview, then probably I'm not going to be able to open that image, right? But we're going to go ahead and start off with a WMF image. Most of us get from clip art or available artwork, we get bitmaps or WMF images. A WMF, true WMF image, is really a vector image created from Corel or Illustrator that's been exported to this format. However, if you buy a clip art package, or if you, buy some of the artwork online, they'll say it's a WMF format, and it's really a JPEG that's been saved as WMF. It doesn't make it clean vector. A true vector format is completely different than a saved bitmap format. So this happens to be a true WMF image. The lines are pretty clean, and, I'm going to go ahead and select that and say open, and just say next. And it's going to ask me some questions. Do I want to smooth this? Like maybe if my edges are, a little rough, I might want to smooth this, but we're going to stay at the default, which is generally a pretty good setting for smoothing images. I'm going to say okay. And what I want is just one color in this. The background doesn't come quite into play so much in a WMF image because sometimes there is no background color. It's just the image. And that's the case with this file. What I have are 2 shades of green, however, that are showing up. And this is a simple image, so I can do this quite easily with this image. I can say, no, really, I only see one color of green. And what it does is it takes every different shade of green that might be in this image and kind of turns it into one. So I have 2 shades of green here, and to show you a little bit what's going on, here's the first shade, there's the second shade, and here is the thread color it's going to select, one thread color. So I'm just going to go ahead and say finish, and there you go. I have a design. It's really that quick with vector images, and you can see this was fast, and boom, the design is done. Now I do have some other options, and I'm going to stop for 1 second because I see some of the chat thing coming in. Okay, Terry's going to chat with us, and we have a new viewer. So I'm not sure who viewer 24 is, but can you hear us on the webinar? And we will wait and see what they say. But you can see, you know, boom, I've got this design, right? And I was using a big hoop, and I can come here and I can select from just a ton of here, right? So, you know, I'm going to go ahead and select this hoop and see how that line fits in there. If I want to select this design and make it larger, I just can click on this little sequence view over here, or I could left drag and select thing as well, and I can resize this and the program will automatically adjust. Because this was automatically created, you can see it takes some of these areas sometimes and turns them into fills once they get large. But you'll also notice this area right here. If I undo and I go back to that area, okay, if I undo and resizing, you can see on the original, it didn't quite create that area. It's very small, and you know, the outlines maybe crossed over here. But once I've resized it, even just a little bit, you see that area maybe a little bit better. And if it doesn't, we have plenty of editing tools to correct it. That's how quick it can be to create, you know, a design in the program. Now, one of the things, because I'm used to looking at this program, I can see like a double layer here. Remember those 2 layers of green we had at the beginning? When I get that, sometimes I get a little bit of an overlap because it sees those 2 areas. And that's going to be right in here. And what is neat about this program is if I want to zoom, I can just use the scroll wheel on my mouse. But see those 2 outlines right here? That's what I'm talking about when I say, you know, just because I'm used to this program, I can pick those 2 things out. And when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, that must be that second shade of green that we didn't want. And sometimes that happens. And I've got a little layer here. See, when I mouse over, you can see the separate outlines. If I want to get rid of those, it's very simple. This sequence viewer controls a lot of things. You can see, you know, I automatically am zooming in and out once I mouse over this because it's showing me the whole design as I mouse over this whole design. But the sequence viewer gives me several different options. If I want to see the bits and pieces, I come down to this icon and click on that and say, I want to do advanced, and I want to see all these pieces. So now what I've got is the same design. Look over here, I can access these individual pieces by clicking in the stitch viewer, right? Or by going over to this section and just left clicking on that piece that was kind of bothering me. See that extra piece? And I can press delete on my keyboard and just get rid of it. So, you know, that's how quick it can be to create a design. Now, I also have plenty of other design options in the program. For example, moving my way, this little piece right here is, you know, I might want that in satin stitching and, you know, to match the rest of the design, right? Well, I have a lot of neat little objects or object features here, I guess is the best way to phrase it. And I have a lot of little toolbars that kind of pop in and out, or I can make them stationary. I like a lot of room on my screen. Look over here, you can tab, and as I move it opens. If you're more comfortable with it being open, they have a little thumbtack, and if I click on this, this will now stay open, for me the whole time. If you like a lot of room, just, click on it so that it's sideways, and that'll just kind of accordion in and out. You can see right now it's telling me that this little section is a step or regular fill, and I can just click to say satin fill. And if I want to add a pattern, I can add a pattern to it. And this is where all of my settings are. Now, these are grayed out because I select fabric and it adjusted the density to the fabric that I selected. I can always come in and change those anytime I want. So, but this is kind of the basics of, click and you have a design. The better the image, the, easier it is to have design automatically digitized for you. This one was, very simple, but it did a very good job of creating those areas, and it's still got the ability to edit as needed. So, do you guys have any questions as we go along? Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I didn't mute them. Okay, I did. Oh, Shirley, you're there. All right. I was worried about you. All right, so that's kind of the boom you've got to design. Now, if you have a cover and you want to turn this into a nifty little vinyl design, right, there may be some things that you change. For starters, you really want to cut these little pieces out, right? But you might want to cut the rest of this out. Just these little pieces are the ones that you might think twice cutting. So you have a couple of options here. I'm going to leave those where they are for right now, but I'm going to add some rhinestones to this, and to add, rhines willy-nilly or wherever you want to. There's a little rhine icon over here, and it says create a crystal shape. So I'm going to click on that, and you can see I've got, the last crystal color that I used, and I'm going to go ahead and stick with this and just go ahead and click, 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 and I've got 3, right? Coming back to the select because I want to show you something. These are about the size I needed, but if I click on an individual one, to my object property end, I can change them to a larger size. Maybe I don't have that size of crystal. Maybe this is the size that, I have more of, or, whatever size. And I can also change it to whatever I want. In this case, since they're all going to be green, I don't really have to change the color. But I want to make sure that I pick the proper size. So you can see over here in this little sequence view, I can do a couple of things. I can click on each individual sequin or rhinestone and hold my control key and select them all individually. Or this little paint allows me to kind of go in here. And what it does is it breaks up things by color, but it also breaks them up by size. Okay, see, this is larger. These at this point. So if I want to change these very quickly, I just select them from that little viewer, and I can say, oh, those are 8. And anytime I want to zoom out, I can use the scroll wheel on my mouse, or I can just use the little zoom up here. Okay, so there's 3 little rhinestones that are in place, and I want to add the rest of the rhinestones where, this little green sweet. Once I have selected size, that generally will stay the default size unless I change it. So I'm just going to come over here, and I'm going to randomly over top of these little, dots, right? And I'm going to go ahead and leave them all one size. You can put whatever size you want in there, but I am really going to stay with just the same size at this point. Okay, so those are all in place now. And you can see, they're all categorized together as long as I have this little paintbrush clicked. I can do them individually or together. And I kind of like doing the all other thing because that allows me to select them all at one time and drag them to the first position and get them my way so that I can come in here and just start selecting these little green pieces. You can see what I'm selecting, the green pieces here, and just delete them. And I could do this if you make a mistake. I do this, a couple different ways. I can do it here, or I could do it, in this little bar and, select them individually. And again, if I want to zoom, I can just scroll. And anything that outlines in purple is what I'll be selecting. And I can get rid of those little pieces so that, this to create a template on my cut. I think we're just down to the last few. Okay, we've got our little rhinestones in place, right? And I've decided that this would just be so much better as a vinyl heat set design. But what happens is if I just have fills here, the program doesn't see fills as an outline. It sees them as a fill. So I can come over to here again, and I can select all of the green pieces. If I hold the Control key or the Shift key, it'll let me select all of these pieces. Okay, so they're all selected. And I'm going to quickly align them and get rid of the fill so I can send this to my cutter. So here is the embroidery. If I come down to the palette down here, same thing, palette, and I hold that open using that little thumbtack. And you get shades of green. At some point, I probably click on something, but there's two shades of green, which is why that's all divided. Let's do one thing, and let's just turn it into all one shade of green. Okay, see how now the green's all together up there, and I only have one green icon down? Now I'm going to quickly outline this. And to do that, this little square right here tells me that this is the outline, that little pencil, and this is a fill. If I had no fill in here, the little bucket would be over here. So the bucket down here means it's a fill, and that's what's selected. And this line up here that has no pencil means that that's the outline, and it's not selected yet. So we're going to select the outline by clicking on it. See the pencil show up? And I'm going to turn off the fill by clicking over here on this no fill. You can see bucket, shows up, right? So here's what I have. I might want to edit a little bit, and stretch out some of these little sections maybe to help the cutter. I wanted to show you how quickly it is to just select something, turn it into an outline, and here's what we have. We have our rhinestones, right? And we have the outline. So this would be maybe cut in vinyl and cut in our rhinestone template. I just simply go File, Export, Crystals and Cutters. And when I export, this is what it does. Here's my crystal, right? There's presets, fabric and freezer. Well, okay, if I go, fabric and freezer, or I go, rhinestones, what I'm getting is just the rhinestones right now. But, so this is not, going to make too much difference. It's a preset for cutting. And there is actually a list, if you have your cutter, of what your preset should be for the pressure on your knife. So I'm not going to really cover that right now. That kind of is good to cover as we go along. But, you can select whatever you want to select on this. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, let's do the fabric and freezer, and, we'll just go with that for right now. I can change things here and save them as well. And I can also say, just print this as one template, right? And if I had 2 or 3 different, sizes in here, it would, that would make it one template instead of multiple ones. So I'm going to not check that. If I come down here, I'm showing the crystals. If I click on outlines, I get this outline, and I can cut vinyl, heat set vinyl, paper, anything that I want, as long as I have an outline. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes.
So above and beyond just a embroidery program, this is a cutter program for a craft cutter. And it allows you, to combine embroidery and cutting. For example, if I did leave this, as a instead of the outline, I would have the embroidery design and be able to enhance it with the rhinestones. Or I can, use this all as outlines and create vinyl paper, and still have the rhinestone template to, create that as well. And you can see you have a lot of different things. You have the silhouette portrait, the cameo, the zing, and let me see what this one is down here. There's an eCraft cutter, the silhouette SD, and there's several different cutter files, here. Plus you have these files up here, depending on what cutter system you have. So that's kind of the beauty of this program, is that really, because it is not instantly a digitizing program like some of the other ones, it's an outline drawing vector program. I am truly making vector lines when I make a design. It's only in the conversion to an embroidery form that it technically puts the stitches in. So that gives me the option to use a cutter. So I'm going to go ahead and just cancel out of this. I wanted to show you real quick, what you could do with a very simple design. You can do this with very complicated designs as well. Let me go ahead and create a new file. And I'm ahead and we'll go with pink to change things up a little bit. And I'm going to select a new image file. And I don't remember what all of these are. I kind of threw different ones in here. Depending on the quality of the artwork, it's going to depend on the quality of the image. And this one I know kind of breaks up, the lines break up quite a bit. This one looks complicated, but it's really quite simple in the scope of that it is a true vector. So anything that's true vector is going to be very quick. And this one looks very, very complicated because there's a lot of lines and there's small lines and, there's all these different things, but it is also a true WMF image. So when I select this one and say next, it's giving me, how much smoothing do you want to do? And I generally leave this alone. I might go down a little bit or sometimes might go up depending on the image, but we'll go down to 7. It's not going to make a significant difference on this particular image. Now, we discussed, what colors to use. Well, I have to use white in this case because it is a significant amount of the background. And, I have to include that. And then here's black. So it's telling me it's going to create this white thread. If I just take an image like this down to one color, I don't know what's created. It's probably going to be like a solid blob of something because the white is so significant. So I need to give this at least 2 colors. And just go ahead and say finish. And you can see, it's pretty much done before it gets on your screen. And if you're looking here, you can see kind of the gaps here. That's not a big deal. It has to do more with stitch direction in this case than anything. But I'm going to go ahead and zoom out so you can see what we have. And I have a choice. I could get rid of the black or I could get rid of the white. And in this case, the white's looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the black. And to do that, just come back over to the light bulb and say advanced or simple just for a range object. But in this case, I'll go ahead and go advanced. Even though I end up with a whole bunch of little pieces over here, I can control those piece color by clicking on that paintbrush at any time. You can see here's the white, maybe it's a little off-white, and here's the big chunk of white, and here's the black. And that kind of gives me a better idea, too, which section do you want, the black or the white? And I guess we'll head into the black. I'm going to we'll go ahead and get rid of the black. You kind of have a choice with this type of image. And you can see, there's my image. Now it's just kind of a rearranging so that they go the way I want. And to do that, I just go here. And if you're working with white, sometimes it's just as easy to select everything. And let me go edit, select all. And just change the color to something that you can look better. You're going to stitch it in white. You can always change that back later. But, now you've got these pieces. Here is the main piece. This piece, when I click on it, it shows you with a green highlight where it is. I might want to stitch that piece first and then this piece, right? And then this piece. And you can look at where these pieces are because they highlight and just drag them into place. It's really to rearrange yourself so that it's a little more structured. The other thing I might want to look at is stitch direction. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to change this to a different color just so you can see things a little better. We'll go with blue. This is always a pretty good blue. Okay, here's, what I've got. Like on my stitch direction, I might not always agree with the stitch direction on, and I might want to say, really, I don't like that direction. Let's change that. And I just click on the direction icon and tell it what direction I want it to sew in. And you can see that change. If I, want it to sew like this, I just drag it like that. And I have a lot of control over how this stitches. In this section, this is a large section, I might want to look at this and think, what direction is best for this particular image? And I can set the entire thing by dragging across. And the same thing for you. I can just stay in this tool and click on each section and select it and set my direction. So, but you can see, this, if I manually punch this image, it would take me quite a while, but the program allows me to very quickly create an image from that because it was a vector file. Now, I also have a lot of stitch settings, like this, for example, is of course going to be a step or complex. You can see I've got applique, I have a net fill, I have, the satin fill, and if I select satin, that looks like quite a mess, but I also have fills that I can come in and I can say, fill pattern it, and I have some different options with satin. This maybe looks a little messy in here, but I can always edit or I can control how things go. And go ahead and select this one maybe, or I just want to get something that shows on your screen. Satin fills don't always show as well as they show on the screen, so just trying to find one that you can see very well. There you go. Okay, so now what I can do is see kind of this little funny thing going on here. I can do a couple of things with the satin area, whether it's large or small. I come here and I can slice this, and it doesn't slice it apart. What it does is say, okay, create like a little slice so that this will sew the way it needs to. And I can create slices pretty much anywhere, but I've been able to kind of shave that a little bit and get these directions a little more controlled. Same thing with here, maybe I want this to go like that, and you can see how that changed, right? I've now got more control. And the same thing here, I might, go like this and just cut it across so that it goes evenly. And if I like something, I can always get rid of it, or I can just drag it across. But you see how much more control I have using this cut tool. The other tool I have to control how things stitch is this direction tool. I can say, this needs to go here, like this. We should start curving like this. I want it to significantly curve like that. And I can control the flow of the stitching in a satin area. So sometimes, even though this is quite a large section, I might want to look at using that satin-filled area and controlling how these sections stitch using these tools. As a matter of fact, the best one to look at is this section is quite complicated, right? And I could fix this little area here by doing a couple of things. First off, I have a little bump, a little extra node there. I could just come in here and select that node and delete it. And I get a little change to the shape, but that's not a big deal. I can just, select this outline and drag it over and fix that shape. You can see I've got a little better stitching already, but if I want to control how that's really looking, it's the drag here and just drag that across, drag it across here, and you can really control how these sections are going to blend into. You guys have any questions so far?
No.
You're good?
I'm good.
This is using a very, good image. It's actually out of Illustrator, and it's very clean vector. And you can see, I have a lot of options. The other thing that I really like about this program, because based a little bit different than some of the other ones, is the way you edit is very, very easy once you get used to it. But it automatically has Bezier curves and those little arrows that will let me curve a line. So I'm going to select this one little section here, and I'm going to go zoom up by just using my scroll wheel. If I want to reshape this section, I go to the edit tool here, and you can see I get these, centered dots, and, if I drag it, I can drag the dot around. These are just, they're called cusp nodes, which they're very clean, crisp, squared nodes. But if I happen to enter a little curve into that equation between those two, I'm going to get the arrows here. You can see what I can do on these arrows. I can also straighten things out very quickly by dragging those arrows back to the node they're coming from. On a round node, it's automatically curved and automatically have these little arrows. I also have the ability to right-click on the outline and add a node. I can click any node and make it, delete it or to a cusp node, right? And make that squared. And, I still have the opportunity to curve things as needed. And I can get very fine-tuned in my curving around something. So it's kind of a fun little program. But this is just a filled section. You can see it's showing just a little bucket for the fill. There's no outline on this. So this is going to be straight embroidery. This obviously is quite large too, much larger than I would probably want. I can always select it, go up here and, left click and drag around this and select everything and resize it quite simply. Just if I know my exact size, I can select everything and enter the size that I want it to be here. I can also mirror, rotate, duplicate, and I have all of my controls really at my fingertips in this program. So that's kind of like a little bit of basics about vector image. Now, generally, we don't have vector images, or we want to create something and we're scanning in our own image. So we're not going to get an Illustrator image with a bitmap or a JPEG. And we're going to have to do a little manual, drawing, because it's really not digitizing, it's drawing point. So let's go ahead and select that color. I'm in a pink mood today. And I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to a bitmap. And this is the bitmap image. If you're on our Facebook page, this is the design that's actually on our Facebook page for the free design from last week's webinars. But I selected this. Here's my little image. I say OK. And, from there, I just say next. It's going to ask me, do I want to open this as a backdrop? Do I want to trace and convert this to outlines? And you can try that. Some of these images will convert very well. Do I want to make this a photo stitch, or do I want to make this a cross stitch? And for right now, we're just going to stick with the basic, design types and open this as a backdrop. Trace to convert outlines, it does okay. But, I'm dealing with a bitmap image. It's not really crisp of an image. So I'm going to go ahead and say finish. And it opens as a backdrop in the background for me to trace over. I can control this at any time by going to View, go to Backdrop. I can hide it. I can put it below the embroidery. I can put it in a washed out kind of faded mode. I can put it above the embroidery so that instead of it getting covered up by what I create, I can always see the image. And I can go to Properties and I can increase or decrease the image size. And you can see that it does a very good job of keeping those images as clear as they are at a smaller size. So I can increase this to any size I want. I can also rotate this very visually. A crooked image, you can straighten it, and I still have those other options. I can also remove the image when I'm done using it if I want to. So here's my image. Now we're coming down to what the program can do when you have to trace the design. And there's several tools in the program that allow you to, do exactly that, to trace over this image. One of my favorites, which sounds really stupid, is the scroll bar zoom, because then I can get in as close as I need to get. These are your punching tools, just able to enter a crystal shape by, one-on-one. This is your create toolbar right here. This is going to give you specific shapes, and I have some control over how many points and, what these shapes end up like. But those are your shape entries. They're kind of automatic, and, this is what you get. This is the manual punch toolbar. If you see anything with a little black triangle in the corner, it's got what's called a flyout menu, and if you hold your mouse on it, what happens is these little icons, the other icons will mouse or pop out. This is not the magic wand in, like I could use it to like select that blue section of the bird. It behaves a little bit differently. This is create an outline shape, and it's one of my favorite tools to use. This is going to create a freehand shape, and it's a little different than these two tools. So we'll kind of cover each one of these real quick. This is going to create Bezier shapes too. This one gets takes a little more practice to get used to using, but I'll show you this one first. This is literally like I can just scribble something. If you're really good, with the mouse and you want to write your name, you certainly could, right? And see, it's just scribbling. It's just making, a line, right? I could, if I'm really make a circle and close that area. So, these are not just a line tool or a fill tool. They're both. It depends on if you close the area. If you close the area, it can become a filled object. So what I did using that tool, I can use that little scribbling, and if you're really good at drawing or you have a tablet and you're very good with your tablet, you can easily trace, over an image. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what that tool does. This next one is a Bezier Curve tool. And what happens is if I click, I'm just going to have straight segments, see? But if I hold the mouse button down and click and drag, I can begin to curve. And this takes a little practice getting used to, because everything's straight unless I hold my mouse and allow those arrows to extend. You can see the further I extend the arrows, the more curve I get. And you'll also have a directional component. So it's not just the arrow length, it's the directional component involved here too. Okay, and I can, come around and curve, but this does take a little practice to get used to. And it's going to do the same thing. It's either going to be a line. As soon as I right click, it's created, or it can be an enclosed area as well. This is my favorite tool. Let me get rid of this one first. Hold on. And I should probably show you that other one real quick, something else too. This one, here's my, my Bezier curve instantly, right? And I'm just going to drag these off so you can see them. Anything I close by touching that first node with the last left click becomes an area. Anything that doesn't close becomes a line. So let me go ahead and get rid of that and go to that other tool. This one is one of my favorites, and it's the easiest to use, or it takes the least amount of time to get used to. It's a very straightforward. If I just place a click, I'm automatically in a curve. Okay, there's my anchor point right here. So I'm automatically going to start curving. See, I don't have to drag. I just have to click and trace the outline, and you can see where the outline is going to curve around your shape. When I get down to a corner, I just hold the mouse in a little bit longer, and I get the straight line. See? I can just come straight over here. When I want to close this with a straight line, I hold the mouse button in a little bit longer to create the straight line. When I'm done creating an area, I can just click on one of these icons, or I can right click and the area is created. These are automatically created so that they're outlined. You can see if I turn off the fill, there's my outline. If I turn off my outline, I'm not going to have anything there, but this is how you would do it. And I'm going to go ahead and just fill this again. And to fill it, I just, left click on one of the bottom halves of these icons. If I want to place an outline around it, I click on the top half of an icon. You can see I've got the red outline around that now. Oops, let me get into the seed outline around that area. And I can turn these on and off very quickly down here. But what I want to show you is on this, I put this blue section on, and I had that wing underneath, and I could go out of 3D view if I really wanted to see the wing a little bit better. But if I really want to see it, I need to go into view, backdrop, and either, above the embroidery. You can see what happens when it's above the embroidery. I can still see the embroidery quite well, but I can also see what I need to do with this wing. And this program has a neat feature. It automatically creates holes, and there's a couple of ways to do this. In other programs, you have to manually create those holes, either while you're making the area or, afterwards. This one, if I make that wing section on top, I just select the tool and click around the shape that I want it to be. And, when I come to a straight section, just hold that mouse a little bit longer. And here's my section, and I'm going to take the outline off. I'll make the wing red so you can see it. Okay, there's my wing. And here's my blue section. Let me take my backdrop back below the embroidery. Okay, see what's going on here? I've got the blue section, and I've got the wing. And you can tell by looking at this that it's probably created a hole. But if I really want to know, I just come over here to Advanced. And you can see the hole in the player here, or in the sequence view, and there's, the wing that I've created. That's automatically for me, and I can turn that off if I don't want that to happen. For example, if I don't want the hole in the blue, I select the red layer and just say never. See the hole disappear? It's not this layer that controls it, and you'll see why logically that is so wonderful in about 2 seconds here. I'm going to go ahead and say that's a big section that I want that underneath to be removed, right? But what is not a huge section, let me zoom out, is that eye that's kind of hiding back there. And I'll go ahead and put the backdrop back on top. Okay, see that little eye? I'm just going to use, the circle icon here and make a little eye. And I can always resize it. But there's the eye. Let me drag it over into position. And change. I don't outline around. Let's make that eye brown. And it looks, I guess that's a pretty decent. Okay, so now I've got this brown eye. And, it's very small. And the program is smart enough to not put a hole underneath that eye. So, and even if it did, if by some chance this eye, was seen as program enough to put a hole underneath, see where those up here? I can always say, no, I don't want that hole there, and just say never. And it closes the hole by the eye while still leaving the holes that I want in the area underneath. That to me is a very time-saving feature, and it can be done because this is really a drawing. It's not truly stitches. It's just showing you stitches on your screen. Do you guys have any questions on anything so far? No questions? Harry, any?
Earlier, when you did the teapot in vinyl, on vinyl, I didn't understand the cutting tool on top of that. What were you cutting out?
Oh, do you have a silhouette cutter or a craft cutter or anything?
No.
Okay, what that does is if I turn anything into an outline, and I send it out to like a silhouette or an e-cutter, they're little cutting machines that you can get, at your dealers or online, that they have a little blade, and I can put fabric on there. I can put, vinyl. I can put cardstock for like scrapbooks. Or I can put a heat set vinyl on there. And when I cut that out, then when I put it in outline and I send the cutter in outline form, it cuts out all of those green pieces for me and allows me to basically take it in and heat press it or iron it to whatever I want to iron it to.
Okay, I understand.
Or if you're doing applique, you could put fabric on that as well.
Now, is that part of this program, the cutting tools?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And in the whole Creative Suite, or if you just have the crystal version of it, you've got the cutting tools.
Okay.
And that's so, that's why it's kind of a neat little program because, it really is in some ways much easier than a lot of the other programs because you're really like everything you're seeing here that stitches on the screen. It's truly vector art. That's why you can send it to a cutter because they're very clean lines. Like in the digitizing program that we did previously, it's an outline, which is very clean. It's an outline, but it's not an outline for like an image file. It's an outline in a wireframe format to define where you're going to put embroidery, and that is what it understands.
Okay.
So, it does handle vector art very well because vector art's clean outlines. But this program, because of the way it's built, is really built well for a cutter as well as embroidery.
Okay.
So
thank you.
It doesn't give you as many bell whistles for embroidery sometimes. It's got but not as many as an embroidery program alone would have. But, it does a very good job with what it does do.
Okay.
So, so that idea, like if I want to create, I'd have to think logically, how do I want to create this? That's kind of a lesson on pathing, but, I can quickly create these pieces as long as I can trace. And we all know how to trace. We learned that, somewhere between kindergarten and first grade, right?
Right.
Now you just have to learn mouse control, and that's nothing but practice. Like, when you got into kindergarten, you had those big chunky crayons. It was a little harder to color in the line and, color inside the lines or to trace something, and they really didn't expect you to be that neat, which is why we had, I guess the big chunky crayons were so we didn't eat them. But, it was harder to use that. And it's the same thing with a mouse. If you're going to, digitize, you really should have a mouse that responds well and you're comfortable using, and it'll make it a lot easier to trace because that's really what you're doing when you have an image file back here.
Okay.
So, and it's the same thing with this. Come in here and I say, oh, I want to make this area. Well, what's kind of nice about this program is that I know I can do this. I can just say, okay, I'm just going to make this big chunky section here. And if it's got a little curve to it, just put a little click in there without holding the mouse button down longer. And, there's my big chunky area. I would edit it a little bit, but, you guys get the point on how quick that's right. I don't have to be super neat in this program. I just have to think as far ahead. Like I don't, like if I did that in other programs, I would have to think, do I have to digitize out the ears? What goes on top? What needs to not be there? I can use the tools in the program and up this back on top of the embroidery. And I can say, okay, so that's good. Now I can make those ears and, I can just trace around the ears and know that this is going to automatically take out the stitches below that, don't need to be there for big areas, right? And if it's not doing that, if it doesn't view that as a big enough area, which it did, I can always tell it to remove it by just going into the properties here. That's what the remove overlaps means. Now, another neat feature that I find very handy when creating a design in this program is, sometimes we make a bunch of lines on something and we really wish they could just be all connected together. And I'll use the whiskers for example. Okay, here's this, and I can connect this line if I want to decrease jumps, right? I can connect, those two lines by just making a V, right? But then you get into this line, if you want them to just come to a point, because embroidery-wise, that's going to look no better or worse than 3 separate lines. But jump-wise, it's a whole lot easier if these are connected, right? Well, here's my 3 lines. And, they're showing up as one piece, mainly because, I created them all at one time. But I've got like this little funny jump down here. You can see it even on the preview, right? And if I zoom in really close, you can see the little nodes. They're not quite touching, which is that funny little jump that's going to happen. Now I can do a couple things in the edit tool and quickly pull this down. But really, I still have 2 lines, which this program handles my in and out points pretty automatic. But I can do something else to make sure that these are all together. And I'm going to have to break these apart to show you what I mean. This, it treated them as one section because I made them all. But if I break them apart, I really have, 2 sections here, which is what I just couldn't see them, the 2 sections. If I want to make sure that those all stitch together, no jump, I just select the 2 sections or more. You can actually combine a lot of different sections together, and I just merge them into one. Then I know that the program is going to handle my in and out points. It's going to handle closing off any lines I might have missed, and I'm not going to have any odd little jumps that I don't know about. This is one piece now. It's going to sew as one piece. And even if I tell it to, let me get rid of the here. Even if I tell this to make a stitch, or, you can see I have a lot of different options here for line stitches, right? No matter what I tell it to do, that's all going to sew logically together. And the program is going to figure out how it has to sew so that I have no jump stitches there. And, so that's really nice if what you want to do is to get a very quick design and not have to think about a lot of logic in, creating a design, like which line, stitches first and where's your in and out point and how do you join it together. I don't have to worry about that. The program handles that for me. So, there's also some lettering options in the program. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to finish this whole design because I think you guys, get an idea of how that goes. I'm going to go ahead and make a new file. And I want to show you some of the options. And I'm just going to go ahead and we can do a monogram file. How's that? We'll start with that. But you can see from here I can scan an image. I can take an image from a webcam. I can create a new graphic, or I can create a new monogram, and I can automatically select the hoop that I want from here as well. So there's a lot of things on this little interface besides just, picking an image. I have now told it I'm making a monogram, so I'm going to say next. And this is monogramming. It's not lettering, but I will show you the lettering. It's saying, okay, how wide do you want this to be? Centimeters, 5 centimeters wide, 15. Let's go ahead and get 5 centimeters wide. I guess that's kind of large. Maybe we'll just go with 15. And it adjusts it because I told it to proportionally scale these, right? Here is what I typed in, my initials. How much do I want to stretch it? 100%. You can see kind of what's going on based on what's, what's already selected. So I, scale it down a little bit, and I get a little preview of what's going to go on. I can also pick whatever template, and these just shape the letters for me. Okay, just based on a template. And I can pick from the TrueType fonts on my computer. That one obviously is not going to work well. This would be kind of interesting, right? But any font that you have in your computer or that you want to add to your computer can, in fact, become a monogram font. There's also borders that are built in. I don't have to use these, but I have some options that, some of them are quite cute and they're a little more traditional. Some of them are a little less traditional. They're corners, see? And I can remove certain corners if I click on these. See what's happening? I've got, fancier corners. I've got, I can resize these well. So I have a lot of different options in the monogramming, as well as I can quickly make something of my own if I really want to. And these arrows on these frames are telling you, the position of where these are going to be. And you can see the difference with this arrow versus the corners that we were looking at earlier. Okay. So I have a lot of options. There's some cute little things. There's stars, there's, you just have to go through and see, which one suits your purpose at this point. And we're just going to grab one real quick. And I'm going to say next. Hey, it's telling me what colors are in this. I'm really not going to worry about changing this right now. I'm really not. I can worry about that later and finish. But what's nice is, even though, this was automatically created, I can bump off any piece I want at any time. I just select it and say goodbye with the delete key. Or I can resize this rotator to do anything I want with it. Just trying to get this to move real quick. The same thing with the lettering. The lettering is not considered one piece. I can break it apart if I want to. But you can come up with some pretty neat, quick monograms, even if you just, want to do something a little different like this, right? Sometimes my mouse in the webinar gets a little dicey. So you can do anything you want with these. And, that's a quick little monogram. Now, the lettering, I'm just going to select these a bit. And the lettering is true type font also. But the lettering is a little different. Here is, the T for selecting your true type font for your lettering. I go up to my tool options, and I can automatically select from the list. I can always come in and change this too. We'll go ahead and go with that one. Do I want it to be bold or italic? Well, if I have a very thin font, I'm going to want to bold it. What size do I want this to be? Well, I'll leave that as default size for right now. And I just click the screen and I type in what I want to type in. Because this is looking at true type fonts and it's looking at vectors, I can kind of see that maybe these images aren't as clean. These fonts aren't as clean as I hoped, but I can edit as well. So I'm going to go ahead and enter to create another line if I want, or if I want to finish the text, I just click, on one of the tools over here, or I can hit enter. So here is, it did complete everything, and rightly so. It said, this is really not going to be good for a satin stitched font, and it put it to a regular fill. It outlines it automatically, and I can, of course, always turn off outlines if I want, or turn them on. Okay. If I want to send this out to Cutter again, I would just simply turn off the fill and send it out to the Cutter. And you can see, it's handled that font pretty well for as complicated as it was. We'll just make this red. How's that? So, that'd be kind of an interesting font to stitch on something, which of course you would know to do in a satin stitch because of how wide it is. If I don't like this font, I just come into my tool options. All right, click on the T again. It selects it like processing program. And I can come up here in my tool options and just say, really, let's pick something else that's so for me, right? And, once I'm done selecting that, then, what it's going to do is look at this and decide, is the font, what fill should it be? But I always have the option to come in, and change this. Let me click this tool. I always have the option to come in and select these and say, really, I think this one could handle a satin stitch. These are the editing tools for lettering. Do you guys have any questions so far?
No.
No.
Okay. There's we're going to go ahead and stop the webinar, mainly because I could go on for hours and hours and hours. There's a million different things in this program. There's arrays. I can, create all kinds of neat little patterns with those arrays, and I can put sequins in them. There's also like net fills, which allow me to do some really neat things, actually. But, I'll show you one of those real quick. If I just take like a big section and I want to flip it, a net fill. It just makes like a fill, right? But you can see I can say, what size do I want the cell to be. I can make it very big. I can make it fairly small. I can angle this net fill. And, there's my net fill. I can also, say, well, really, I think I want to have a row fill. And you can see what the row fill does. It, kind of fills that in a little differently. And I can say, really, I kind of like this pattern or, this pattern. See what's going on. What would be generally called a motif fill in, other programs, right? But I have a lot of these different little fill options over here. Find my mouse here. And there are some neat ones, like I have quilt fills. Okay. So, and they're just kind of fun little things, that you can play to create little filled areas and stuff. And there are also a lot of line options as well. And these patterns all stitch very, very well in the small ones. Oh, but, well, let me go ahead and I've got somebody chatting. Hold on a second. You'll get it, Terry. That's what the webinars are for, so that, when you go through, we generally only cover one subject mainly in the webinar. And let you kind of focus on that one subject or maybe one or two things that go with it rather than, like what you're getting today. Today's kind of a, wow, look what the program can do kind of webinar, where most of our webinars are going to be a little more specific. But let me go ahead and turn off the recorder. And